Hey everyone, and welcome back. Have you ever thought about how it's always women who shoulder the responsibility of family planning? It's pretty wild when you realize the only option for men has been condoms forever. But you know what? Scientists are trying to change that, and we get to learn all about some seriously cutting-edge research.
It's true. We're going to be diving into a study that's taking a completely new approach to male contraception, and it could change everything.
Yeah. So today we're doing a deep dive into this excerpt from a scientific article. It's called Towards a Male Contraceptive That Doesn't Target Hormones. We'll break down how it works and why it's causing so much excitement in reproductive science. So basically, we're talking about a potential future where men actually have a real choice when it comes to contraception.
The need for this is huge. Global estimates show there are something like 70 million abortions every year.
Wow, that's a crazy number. It just shows why we need more contraceptive options, especially for men.
Exactly. Men need more agency when it comes to family planning decisions, and this research could be a big step in that direction. Actually, one of the researchers in the study, Dr. Matsatsik, said something that really stuck with me. He said, men need more say in contraception, just like women. In partners, if some women can't take a contraceptive, the men should be wanting to contribute to the strategy of contraception. It's not just about science. It's about changing societal norms and giving men a more equal role in reproductive health.
I really like that. It's about time, right? But let's get down to business. Why has it been so hard to come up with a male contraceptive? I mean, women have had the pill for decades now. What's the holdup?
That's a great question. Honestly, there are a bunch of different factors. The biggest is that the bar for side effects in male contraceptives is super high. Think about it. For men to really be on board with a new form of birth control, it has to be really safe, with minimal side effects. It's a big challenge.
Yeah, that makes sense. For women, it's different because hormonal contraceptives have been around for so long, even though they have side effects. But for a new male contraceptive, it has to be perfect, right?
Exactly. And remember, the female hormonal pill was developed like 60 years ago. Back then, the standards for acceptable side effects were way different. Researchers are really trying to develop something that works and doesn't have any bad side effects. It's a tricky balance.
So what makes this new approach special? How does it actually work?
Well, the most important thing is this enzyme. It's called STK33. Scientists found that when they deleted this enzyme in mice, they became infertile. And they also found that mutations in the gene that makes STK33 were linked to infertility in humans, too. So it looks like this enzyme is crucial for sperm development.
Wait, hold on. Deleting an enzyme? That sounds pretty extreme. Is that what they're talking about doing for human contraception?
Not really. Deleting the enzyme was just the first step in the research, like flipping a switch to see what happens, But to develop a contraceptive that's reversible, they had to find a way to block the enzyme temporarily. And that's where things get really interesting. They used this technique called DNA-encoded library screening, DEL for short.
Okay, I'm already interested. DEL, that sounds pretty high tech.
It is. Imagine a massive speed dating event, but for molecules. So they created this library of billions of different chemical compounds, and each one had its own little DNA name tag. They then mixed this whole library with the STK33 enzyme and just waited to see which compounds would click with the enzyme, meaning which ones bound to it strongly. And those DNA tags helped them figure out the best matches, the compounds that could potentially block the enzyme's activity.
So it's kind of like a molecular matchmaking game.
Yeah.
Where only the strongest connections make it through.
You got it. And the winner of this molecular matchmaking game was a compound called CDD2807.
CDD2807. Okay, got it. So what happened when they tested this on mice?
The results were amazing. CDD2807 really reduced fertility in the male mice. But here's the best part. They didn't see any toxic side effects.
No side effects. Now that's what I'm talking about. That's what we've been waiting for.
It's definitely a major breakthrough. And there's more. The effects of CDD2807 were reversible. Once they stopped giving the mice the compound, their fertility went right back to normal. So this means that guys could potentially control their fertility with this compound without having to worry about long-term effects.
That's incredible. It seems like this CDD2807 is the real deal. But how does it know to just target the reproductive system?
Now we're getting into the specifics. So our bodies have these barriers that protect sensitive areas. The blood test barrier is kind of like a bouncer at the entrance to the testes, only letting certain molecules in. CDD2807 managed to get past this bouncer, which is good because it means it can do its job. But here's the amazing part. It couldn't cross the blood-brain barrier. That's another bouncer, but this one's guarding the brain. So CDD2807 does its thing in the reproductive system without messing with the brain at all.
Wow, that's wild. It's like a guided missile hitting the target perfectly. This really sounds like it's going to change the game.
It's super promising, but it's important to remember that this is still early research.
Right, so we won't be seeing this at the pharmacy anytime soon.
Not quite. The next step is to test it on non-human primates, since they're more similar to humans. This will give us a better idea of how it works in a more complex system. But even if it takes a while to get to human trials, this research is a really big step forward.
It definitely feels like this is a big deal, but I am curious, what does this mean in the grand scheme of things? How could this research change reproductive health?
That's where things get super interesting, and that's what we'll be talking about after the break.
So we've been talking about this amazing new research on a possible male contraceptive. It seems like CDD 2807 could really change things. But I think it's interesting to zoom out a little and consider the big picture. Like, what kind of impact could this have on society and relationships?
Well, just imagine a world where men have as many choices for contraception as women. It could totally change how we think about family planning and relationships, and even gender roles.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing.
Right.
For so long, we've just assumed that contraception is a woman's responsibility.
Hmm.
This could really turn that idea on its head.
Absolutely. And think about how it would impact individual freedom and choice. Men and women could have so much more control over their reproductive health and family planning. It could even lead to more open conversations between couples and more equal sharing of responsibility, and maybe even fewer unplanned pregnancies.
Yeah, it's like opening up all these new possibilities.
Yeah.
But it makes me wonder about the challenges too. Like, how do we make sure this new contraceptive is available to everyone, not just people who can afford it or live in certain places?
That's a really important point. It can't become some luxury that only certain people have access to. Accessibility and affordability have to be top priorities if we want this to really benefit everyone.
For sure. And what about the potential for, like, disagreements between couples? What if one person wants to use it but the other one doesn't? Who gets to make that decision?
You're bringing up some really important questions. It highlights that we need to be having these conversations about the social and ethical implications of this technology, not just the scientific research. It's not enough to just create a new drug. We have to think about how it will be used and how it might affect individuals and relationships.
It reminds me of how much things changed when the female pill came out. It sparked a revolution in gender roles and social norms. This new contraceptive could be just as transformative.
It really is fascinating to think about. It could be a catalyst for huge changes in how we view masculinity and responsibility and relationships in general.
Okay, so we've discussed all the potential benefits and some of the challenges, but I think it's important to remember that this is just one study.
Yeah, you're right. The results are very promising, but this research is still in its early stages.
So what's the next step for CDD 2807? What do the researchers have to figure out before this becomes a reality for men?
The next big thing is testing CDD 2807 on non-human primates. That's super important because it will tell us if it works the same way in a species that's more like humans. If those trials are successful, then they can start planning for human trials. And of course, all of this takes time and money. Drug development is a slow and complicated process, but this research seems to be going in the right direction.
It's pretty exciting to think that we might be seeing the start of a whole new era in reproductive health. But even with all the potential benefits, there's always the possibility of unintended consequences. Could there be any long-term effects we don't know about yet?
That's a really important question, and it's something we need to think about with any new medical treatment. That's why we need thorough testing and long-term monitoring. It's about finding the right balance between innovation and safety. But one of the things that's so interesting about this research is that it targets just one specific enzyme involved in sperm development. That focused approach should help minimize the risk of side effects.
So it's like they found a way to adjust this one tiny part of the reproductive system without affecting anything else.
Exactly. That's what makes this research so groundbreaking. It's not about hitting the system with a sledgehammer. It's more like using a scalpel.
I love that analogy. It really shows how precise and clever this new approach is. And speaking of cleverness, I'm interested to learn more about the scientists behind this research. What can you tell us about them?
Well, the main researchers on this study are Dr. Martin Matsuk from Baylor College of Medicine and Dr. James Bradner from the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. They're both leaders in their fields. Dr. Matsuk has spent his whole career studying the genetic and molecular mechanisms of reproductive biology.
So he's like the Sherlock Holmes of sperm, always trying to figure out how fertility works.
That's a good way to put it. And Dr. Bradner is known for his work on developing new cancer drugs. It's really cool that they've combined their expertise from these two different fields to work on this challenge in reproductive health.
Yeah, it just goes to show that amazing things can happen when different disciplines come together. It's like they've used their superpowers to create something truly remarkable. But I'm sure it wasn't easy. What are some of the hardest things they had to deal with during their research?
One of the biggest challenges was finding the right compound to inhibit STK33. Remember that huge library of billions of compounds we talked about before?
Oh yeah, the molecular speed dating. It sounds like searching for a needle in a haystack.
It really was. They had to analyze tons of data to find the most promising options. And once they found CDD2807, they had to prove that it could actually get past the blood test barrier without causing any negative side effects. It was a long and careful process with a lot of trial and error.
It really shows how dedicated and persistent these scientists are. They didn't give up, and now their work could change so many lives.
It's a testament to the power of scientific curiosity and collaboration, and a good reminder that sometimes the biggest discoveries come from unexpected places.
This deep dive has definitely been an eye-opener. I'm really inspired by the potential of this research, but I also know it's important to think critically about it. What are some things we should be considering as this research continues?
That's a great question. I think it's essential to consider how this could impact different groups of men. We need to make sure that this contraceptive is effective and safe for men of all ages, backgrounds, and ethnicities, and we have to think about cultural and social factors that might influence whether people accept and use it.
It's like we need to be aware of the human side of this breakthrough.
Exactly. We have to make sure it benefits everyone equally.
It sounds like there's a lot more to explore and discuss as this research moves forward. It feels like we're just starting a much bigger conversation about reproductive health, gender roles, and individual choice.
For sure. This research opens up so many exciting questions and possibilities. It's going to be fascinating to watch how it shapes the future of family planning and how we think about reproductive freedom. Speaking of the future, I think it's time to wrap things up and leave our listeners with something to ponder.
Okay, so we've covered a lot today. From the science behind this potential male contraceptive to the bigger societal impact it could have. Before we go, I want to leave you with a question to think about. Imagine a world where men have as many choices for contraception as women do. How do you think that would change things?
It's such an interesting question. How would it impact family dynamics? Would it change traditional gender roles? What about personal freedom and making informed decisions about having kids? It's a really fascinating thought experiment and one that we'll probably be thinking about more and more as this research goes on.
I totally agree. It's a future with endless possibilities. Some we can predict and some we can't even imagine yet. But it's a future where men and women could share the responsibility of family planning in a more balanced way. And that, to me, is incredibly exciting.
It's definitely a future worth working towards. And who knows, maybe this CDD 2807 research is the first step in making that future a reality.
It's been amazing diving into this topic with you today. I feel like we've only scratched the surface, but it's definitely given me a lot to think about.
I've had a great time, too. Conversations like this are so important because they spark curiosity, challenge assumptions, and help us better understand ourselves and the world.
And that's what the deep dive is all about. Thanks to all our listeners for joining us on this journey of discovery. We hope you learned something new and maybe even had your own aha moment along the way.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot today. You know, the science behind this new male contraceptive and what it could mean for society as a whole. Before we wrap up, though, I want to leave you with a question, something to really think about. Imagine a world where men have just as many options for contraception as women do. How do you think that would change things?
Wow. That's a question that really gets the imagination going. How would it affect family dynamics? Would we see traditional gender roles start to shift? What about individual freedom? You know, the ability to make informed choices about when or if to have kids. It's a fascinating thought experiment, and I think it's one that will become more and more relevant as this research moves forward.
I think so, too. It's a future full of possibilities, some we can probably see coming and others that we can't even imagine yet. But it's a future where men and women could share the responsibility of family planning more equally. And I think that's really exciting.
It's definitely a future worth fighting for. And who knows, maybe this research on CDD 2807 is the first step towards making that future a reality.
Well, it's been great discussing this with you. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface, but it's given me a lot to think about.
The feeling's mutual. It's conversations like this that make people curious, you know? They challenge our assumptions and ultimately help us understand ourselves and the world better.
And that's exactly what the deep dive is all about. A huge thank you to all our listeners for joining us on this journey of discovery. We hope you've learned something new today and maybe even had an aha moment or two along the way.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.